in the world of the punk snobs who look down upon the progressive rock and the art rock, they think the John Lydon, the Sex Pistols revolution of the 70s was one of the greatest things to ever happen, and that, rock music in between, say, the Beatles and that point was horrid. Maybe they like David Bowie, actually. And the glam was good. They like the glam. Why are they such snobs? Like, why do they think that they're like the lack of trying and the lack of effort seemingly is so much better than Lark's Tongues and Aspic or Fragile or Octopus by Gentle Giant or I don't know, 10cc or whatever the heck. 10cc, yeah, why not? Well, it's because it's not like they thought the Sex Pistols was the best thing ever. A lot of the snobs eventually thought the Sex Pistols was a bit lame too. They loved Wire. Wire was one of the most interesting and clever bands, and unlike Swell Maps, who were still fundamentally a rock and roll outfit, even though they had a modernist approach and they were dissecting the tropes of the genre while they were reveling in the genre, Wire were really unraveling the genre to the point where it could alienate the average rock listener, and you had to be really in on the idea that these are going to be the core structures of the rock song. You're going to appreciate it for that, and in as much it was taking rock music was kind of an abrasion in the grand scheme of what was possible within music theory. When it emerged on the scene in the mid-50s, and Wire taking it on Chairs Missing especially this sophomore album to the next level. It's becoming avant-garde, and it's almost incorporating or devising new ideas of how one could enjoy pop music in general. These strange tempos. It's at times it's presaging the enjoyment of forms like EDM, which disco was very budding at this time, but the higher tempo EDM of the later 80s and through the 90s, rave EDM for older people who may need a specific frame of reference there. I would challenge rock fans, again, of the kind of Sea Tranquility variety. I remember, just like I did with the Food by MF Doom video, it's like you've looked down upon the kind of artier, snobbier punk world, the post-punk world, this kind of experimental DIY world. Check out Wire's Chairs Missing. If you're a fan of the Henry Cow, Aksak Mabul, Universe Zero, RIO world, you like experimental rock, I like to think you'll love Chairs Missing. There's so much. This is one of the great works of art. This is one of the great justifications of rock music as an art form, because it takes the form, it drops the rock, it drops the role of the rock and roll. It's just a rock against the glass ceiling of pompous, strict, formal and music theory. Yeah, why not? Rock and roll they could deal with. It was four chord silliness in the pop music context. But Wire's Chairs Missing was really looking at where rock music could be relevant to 20th century classical music and the noise experiments of minimalist music, for example, and the newer avant-garde compositional schools of thought. We have to remember as well, whilst we associate a lot of the punk bands with being, especially the Sex Pistols, guys from 18 to 21, say. Sid Vicious famously died when he was 21, not even old enough for the 27 Club, which it is what it is. I was gonna say it's sad. Sid Vicious didn't contribute that much to music history. There's a weird what is punk thing, debate, cringe thing that happened recently with John Lydon and Marky Ramone. Henry Rollins was there. It was a whole feud thing, and Marky Ramone tried to claim that Sid Vicious was the real Sex Pistol. And Marky Ramone has some claim to being an OG original punk or whatever, because he was in Richard Hell's band, which Malcolm McLaren managed before the Pistols, and they say that Johnny Rotten got his look from Richard Hell. Although Marky Ramone then would forfeit any claim to punk cred by claiming that Sid Vicious was the real punk. Sid Vicious was a poser who took the credit and took up the spot of Glenn Matlock, who was the actual songwriter of the band, and Steve Jones has been living the most unpunk lifestyle. The original guitarist of the Sex Pistols, Steve Jones, has been living this horrible Jonesy's Jukebox LA lifestyle, coasting off of exploiting this work that he didn't even do, and all Steve Jones did was use a curse word on television. What a revolutionary. Steve Jones, you're a hack, and everyone who was for half a brain cell fucking knows it. And John Lydon and Glenn Matlock and Paul Cook all know that you're a coattail riding piece of garbage and the most unpunk human being alive. Wire Chairs Missing is true punk rock. Wire Chairs Missing is where the actual interesting avant-garde experiments within, because rock, at the end of the day, the Sex Pistols is just, it's just rock and roll again. I was going to say the Sex Pistols, they're young. It's 18 to 21. But even the Clash, they were like in their mid-20s to up approaching their 30s through the self-titled To London Calling Sandinista era. And while Colin Newman was 25, 26, I think Bruce Gilbert and Robert Gray were a bit older. Like, they were approaching 30 when they were doing Chairs Missing and 154. And so they're a bit older and wiser, and they had this, an understanding of, we don't just want to play rock and roll, we want to explore what's interesting about rock and roll, what we find fascinating and compelling about rock and roll as music, why we find it worth thinking about rather than just, moving our body and not thinking about, as it were. What we have with Chairs Missing by a Wire is an album which really ought to belong to on the great canon, Rolling Stone magazine, whoever you want to name, their great canon of rock albums. Chairs Missing really ought to be there. And more importantly, maybe it even just ought to be on the great music album canon of albums in general. I think the reason it's so re-listenable, it's such a fascinating statement to put something like this in the canon. It can elevate and drive the imaginations of rock musicians or musicians in general forward. Wise, fearless, brazen, audacious approach to genre norms resulted in this package, this pool of different styles to draw from, and every other song sounds like it's 15 to 20 years ahead of its time, because they were really analysing and expressing and playing around with everything that could be done within the formula they were given. They were experimenting. It's one of the last times when rock musicians could experiment within the formula and actually come up with something interesting that wasn't ripping off Wire